In the waning light of a fading empire, where the echoes of clashing armies drifted across the Balkans and Anatolia, another story unfolded, a quieter one, hidden behind the walls of stone-built monasteries and candle-lit convents. It was the story of Christian nuns living under Ottoman rule, women whose lives were shaped by faith, devotion, and an empire that claimed dominion over their lands, their churches, and sometimes even their destinies. As the Ottoman Empire expanded into Eastern Europe, monasteries became islands of faith in a sea of shifting power. For centuries, Christian communities were allowed to exist under the millet system, granted autonomy in worship, yet burdened by heavy taxes, suspicion, and the unpredictable cruelty of local governors. And within these communities lived the nuns, women who had chosen a life far from the world, only to find that the world would soon come crashing in. The story begins in the late 15th century when the Ottoman advance swept across Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, and the old Byzantine territories. Many monasteries found themselves suddenly under foreign rule. Some were respected and left untouched. Others became targets. In remote valleys, the bells of small convents rang in fear rather than worship, as soldiers patrolled nearby roads and rumors of raids spread like winter wind. The fear wasn't T-born from official imperial policy, it came from the chaos between the lines, the ambitions of local beys, the greed of tax collectors, and the harsh unpredictability of frontier life. The empire was vast, and its hand did not always control those who claimed to serve it. In some regions, nuns were pressured to pay jizya, the tax placed on non-Muslims, a tax impossible for small convents to afford. When they could not pay, properties were seized, icons were stripped from their altars, and the sisters were forced to abandon centuries-old sanctuaries. There were whispers of night raids in Bosnia, where small groups of soldiers would storm convents searching for gold, manuscripts, or simply to assert power. More tragic were the stories of nuns who disappeared, some taken into slavery, others fleeing into forests, never to be found. These tales spread quietly among Christian villages, like warnings carried from one generation to the next. By the 16th century, the empire's pressure tightened. Convents near major cities were watched closely. The nuns who tended to the sick and the poor were suddenly caught in the crossfire of political tension, accused of hiding rebels, spies, or messages from foreign Christian powers. Slowly, persecution took on a new shape, not always through violence but through suffocation. Restrictions on repairs of churches meant roofs collapsed over prayer halls. Monasteries were denied the right to ring bells. Food supplies were limited by taxes that kept growing. For many convents, faith became their only remaining refuge. Yet the most haunting stories come from the Greek islands and the mountainous monasteries of the Balkans. In the Aegean, pirate raids, sometimes working with corrupt Ottoman officials, targeted convents, capturing nuns and selling them into markets in North Africa. Some were ransomed back by Christian communities at enormous cost. Others vanished into the shadows of slavery, remembered only through desperate letters sent across the sea. In the mountains of Montenegro and Albania, resistance movements hid in forests, and Ottoman forces responded harshly. Entire convents were burned during sweeps against rebels. Nuns who refused to flee stayed behind to guard their icons, and many paid with their lives. Perhaps the most heartbreaking tale is that of the convent of St. Paraskevi in Epirus. In the early 17th century, the sisters refused to surrender their church land to a local Ottoman official who sought to build a private estate. For months, they were threatened. For months, they prayed. One night, soldiers descended on the convent. The church was looted, manuscripts burned, and several nuns were taken away. The survivors later wrote letters that still exist today, letters soaked in grief, describing the night their sanctuary fell silent. Their story became a symbol among Greek Christians, a quiet reminder of endurance in the face of oppression. In some places, nuns chose another path: escape. Across the Balkans, groups of sisters fled into the mountains, traveling by night, living in caves, carrying with them nothing but small icons and fragments of relics. Some reached Venetian or Russian-protected territories where they rebuilt their convents from ashes. Others died on the journey, remembered only in the oral traditions of villages that sheltered them. All of this happened in the shadows of an empire that was itself struggling with war, corruption, and instability. As the Ottoman power began to fracture in the 18th and 19th centuries, the pressure on Christian communities increased. New wars erupted: the Greek War of Independence, uprisings in Serbia, rebellions in Bulgaria, and Christian convents were caught in the middle. Some were destroyed intentionally as political targets. Others were wiped out in the chaos of rebellion and retaliation. The nuns who survived became silent witnesses to the empire's collapse, carrying scars that history often forgets. Yet their story is not only one of suffering, it's also a story of resilience. Despite threats, taxes, raids, and forced conversions, many convents survived. Nuns continued to teach children in secret, copying manuscripts by candlelight so their heritage would not disappear. They sheltered orphans during wars, tended to the wounded, and kept alive ancient chants that would later become symbols of national identity. When the Ottoman Empire finally weakened and Christian nations regained independence, these nuns became living symbols of endurance, women who had kept the flame alive through centuries of darkness. Their tragic fate was not only what they suffered, but what they preserved, what they protected, and what they refused to surrender. The story of Christian nuns under the Ottoman Empire is not the story of armies or sultans. It is the story of quiet resistance, candles burning in the dark, prayers whispered under threat, footsteps echoing through abandoned halls, manuscripts hidden beneath floorboards, and faith standing firm in the face of fear. It is the story of women who stood unarmed against the currents of history and refused to be erased. And their legacy lives on not in monuments of stone, but in the resilience of the Christian communities of the Balkans, Greece, Anatolia, and beyond, communities whose survival was shaped, protected, and carried forward by these silent guardians of faith.